Decoy ships, missile destroyers, and volleys instead of ransom. Why attacking the Soviet fleet was a fatal mistake for aggressive pirates. In the 1970s, pirates in the Strait of Malacca, Indonesia, hunted merchant vessels, a pursuit that had suddenly become a lucrative business. High-speed boats, assault rifles, and boarding hooks. The scheme was polished to a reflex. The victims did not resist. Ransoms were paid by insurance companies. But then, one of the pirates made a mistake. They attacked a Soviet dry cargo ship, and no one made it out of that story alive. The USSR solved the problem of maritime piracy not through courts or complaints to the UN. It made attacking its fleet such a dangerous endeavor that pirates from Somalia to Indonesia passed down one single rule: do not touch the red flag. Let's take a look at exactly how this worked. Admiral Gorshkov's great game. To understand how the USSR gained the ability to chase pirates across the Indian Ocean, one must start with one man. Admiral Sergei Gorshkov commanded the Soviet Navy for nearly 30 years, from 1956 to 1985. When he came to power, the Soviet fleet was merely an auxiliary force for the land army. By the time he left, it was the second most powerful naval force on the planet. Gorshkov understood something that the land marshals stubbornly refused to acknowledge. The USSR was critically dependent on maritime transport. For the Siberian coast and regions north of Vladivostok, sea transport remained the only way to deliver food and industrial goods. Every dry cargo ship was not just a vessel, but an artery feeding entire regions of the country. The 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis became Gorshkov's golden argument. A fleet that could not secure a presence off the coast of Cuba was a shameful national humiliation. Gorshkov used it as leverage. He convinced both military and political leaders of the necessity of a full-fledged, powerful blue water navy. Not just submarines, but large surface ships capable of showing the flag anywhere in the world. And he got his way. The difference between the Soviet and Western approaches was fundamental. In the NATO model, the merchant fleet is private business, while the military is a state structure. Between them lies a wide legal chasm. The USSR had no such division. The merchant, military, and scientific fleets worked as a unified mechanism under the management of the Ministry of the Merchant Marine. An attack on a dry cargo ship was equated to an attack on the state, and the state knew how to stand up for itself.
In the 1970s and 1980s, piracy in Southeast Asia was experiencing a true renaissance. The Strait of Malacca, 900 kilometers of water between Malaysia and Sumatra, narrowing in some places to just 1.5 kilometers, was the perfect hunting ground. Thousands of small islands, mangrove thickets, and river estuaries made hiding after an attack far easier than finding a parking spot in central Moscow. 40% of world trade passed through this corridor, and pirates took their percentage from it. The bulk of the pirates were Indonesian fishermen from the Riau archipelago and Palembang on Sumatra. By day, they hauled nets. By night, they robbed cargo ships. In the local slang of Batam Island, this was called shopping. Pull up to a ship, take the crew's cash, ship stores, engine spare parts, and head back to your nets. One of the most famous pirate leaders of that period, Saiful Rossi, acted like a maritime Robin Hood, distributing loot from robbed ships to locals and enjoying near folk hero status in the area. The impulse for piracy in the Gulf of Thailand and the South China Sea was triggered by a tragic story. After the fall of the pro-American regime in 1975, a stream of refugees on boats poured out of Vietnam. Thai fishermen quickly realized that these frail vessels packed with people were easy prey. UN statistics for 1981 are horrifying. Out of 452 boats with Vietnamese refugees that reached Thailand, 349 were attacked by pirates. 228 women were kidnapped, and 881 people died or went missing. Pirates who started by hunting defenseless refugees quickly developed a taste for it and switched to international shipping, leading to an avalanche of attacks on merchant vessels throughout the region. Organized syndicates operated on an entirely different level. They coordinated attacks on large merchant ships, hijacked entire cargoes, rubber, fuel, non-ferrous metals, and resold them through the shadow markets of southern China. In 1995, 10,000 tons of rubber evaporated this way in just 3 months. These groups had their own intelligence. They knew ship schedules, routes, and security weak points. Their boats were equipped with GPS and they carried automatic weapons. Before night boardings, according to witnesses, pirates would drink and take morphine to dull their fear of the dark and the speed, as most of them were ordinary fishermen by day. The Indian Squadron. In 1974, the USSR formed the 8th Operational Squadron, the Indian Squadron. This corridor was used by ships traveling between the European part of the country and the Far East. Losing control over it meant cutting one's own transport artery. The squadron had tasks in abundance.
It monitored the US Navy's 7th Fleet, supported allies in Africa and Asia, and conducted humanitarian missions. In the 70s, Soviet sailors cleared mines from the port of Chittagong in Bangladesh, a delicate and deadly task. They also cleared the Suez Canal of mines left over from the Arab-Israeli wars. Both operations returned key trade routes to service. But there was also a silent task. Squadron ships escorted Soviet merchant convoys through dangerous waters. A Project 1135 Burevestnik large anti-submarine ship alongside a caravan of cargo vessels meant 100mm artillery and a helicopter for reconnaissance. The Project 956 Sarich destroyer possessed enough firepower to suppress coastal targets. A pirate boat near such ships looked roughly like a mosquito in front of a flamethrower. How the decoy ships worked. Soon vessels appeared in the Strait of Malacca and off the coast of East Africa that looked ordinary dry cargo ships or fishing trawlers. A minimum crew on deck, no visible weapons, and a slow pace. The ideal target. Inside such a ship, a surprise was hidden. A reinforced unit of naval infantry. Assault rifles, heavy machine guns, grenade launchers, all of this was camouflaged in the cargo holds and superstructures behind false bulkheads. On the outside, a defenseless tub. On the inside, a floating fortress. When pirate boats came within boarding range, hidden ports in the hull would swing open. Lethal fire was opened on the attackers. The battle lasted mere minutes. The numerical and firepower superiority of the Marines, combined with the effect of total surprise, left no chance. Add to this the training. Professional soldiers against rowdy fishermen. There were no survivors. And this was the key element of the strategy. The lack of witnesses from the attackers' side created an aura of mystical danger around Soviet ships. Pirate communities, despite the fragmentation, possess excellent information channels. Rumors spread through ports from Jakarta to Mogadishu. If you attack a ship with a red flag, it will swallow you whole. No one returns from there. When piracy is a business based on the calculation of risk versus profit, Soviet ships became a toxic asset. Why risk your life when there are plenty of ships nearby under flags of convenience, whose crews will raise their hands at the first shot? Floating fortresses. The protection of Soviet ships was not just provided by destroyers on the outside. The crews themselves were ready for battle. The USSR merchant fleet was officially listed as a Navy reserve. The top brass of the ship's command were reserve officers who had undergone military training.
During an attack, a cargo ship's crew acted as a single combat unit rather than a group of frightened civilians. On ships operating in dangerous areas, an entire arsenal of measures was employed. Crews were trained in anti-boarding actions, high-pressure water cannons could knock a person off their feet from dozens of meters away, and sharp maneuvering created waves capable of capsizing a pirate boat. In high-risk zones, reinforced watches were introduced with searchlights and night vision devices. On the most vulnerable ships, Marine detachments were stationed on board. The role of the Zampolet, the captain's first mate for political affairs, often draws a smirk, but it was he who ensured the iron discipline that kept everyone from scattering during an attack. Every crew member knew their post and their task. This stood in stark contrast to the crews of private ships under European flags, where at the first shots, the crew might simply hide in the engine room. The legacy of the Soviet school. The Soviet Union collapsed, but its anti-piracy school did not. When Somali pirates paralyzed shipping in the Gulf of Aden in the 2000s, Russia sent warships to the region. In 2010, the Marshal Shaposhnikov liberated the hijacked tanker Moskovsky Universitet, Harshly, quickly, and without negotiations. Marines stormed the vessel, the pirates' boats were destroyed on the spot. The Admiral Penteliev patrolled the same area, escorting convoys and demonstrating a readiness to use force. The methods became softer in the details. Modern Russia is forced to reckon more with international law, but the foundation remains Soviet. Piracy stops when the price of an attack becomes unacceptably high. This was the main lesson of the Soviet strategy. Piracy is not a romance with parrots and black flags. It is an economic crime built on cold calculation. As long as the profit from a seizure exceeds the risk, pirates will attack. The USSR flipped this equation, making the risk absolute. Not a fine, not prison, instant death, no questions asked. And the equation stopped adding up. That's the math for you. Behind every Soviet ship, from a rusty trawler to an oil tanker, stood a simple threat. Just try touching it. The pirates tried, and they changed their minds.